At 15, I didn't understand how quickly a family could turn on you. One moment I was standing in the hallway of the only house I'd ever known, my school bag still on my shoulder, rain pounding against the windows so hard, it sounded like the roof might cave in. The next moment, my father was screaming so loudly his voice cracked, his face red with rage, his finger shaking as he pointed toward the front door. "Get out of my house," he yelled. "I don't need a sick daughter." Those words didn't even register at first. They felt unreal, like something said in a movie, not something a father says to his own child. I remember looking at my mother, waiting for her to step in, to say this had gone too far. She didn't. She stood behind him with her arms crossed, lips pressed tight, eyes cold and distant. My sister was there too, leaning against the wall, watching silently. There was something almost satisfied in her expression. It had started that morning with a lie. I had been sick for weeks, dizzy spells, constant fatigue, pain that came and went without warning. Doctors were still running tests, and I'd missed more school than usual. My sister told my parents I was faking it. She said I just wanted attention, that I was pretending to be ill to avoid exams and chores. She said she'd caught me acting normal when no one was watching. They believed her. By the time I came home that evening, the verdict had already been decided. There was no discussion, no questions, no chance to explain. My father didn't want to hear a word I said. Every sentence I tried to speak was cut off by shouting. "You're a burden," he said. "You embarrass this family," he said. "And now you're lying on top of it all." The storm outside grew louder, thunder cracking so close it shook the walls. When he grabbed my backpack and threw it at my feet, something inside me went completely still. Not numb, just quiet, like my body knew fighting back would only make it worse. "Take your things and go," he said again. Now, I looked down at the bag. Inside was a half-finished homework assignment, a library book, and the hoodie I always wore when I felt cold. That was it. 15 years of life reduced to what I could carry on my back. I waited one last second. Maybe my mother would say my name. Maybe she would tell him to stop. She didn't. She turned away and walked into the kitchen. That was when I understood something that would take me years to fully accept. I was on my own. I picked up my bag, opened the door, and stepped outside. The rain hit me instantly cold, heavy, soaking through my clothes in seconds. The wind nearly knocked me off balance. Behind me, the door slammed shut so hard the frame rattled. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, waiting for it to open again. It didn't. I started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. The streets blurred as rain mixed with tears I didn't even remember starting. Cars passed, their headlights cutting through the darkness, splashing water onto the sidewalk. No one stopped. No one looked twice. After an hour, my shoes were soaked. My hands were numb. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, and for a split second, hope flared in my chest. I pulled it out. It was my sister. "You did this to yourself." That was it. No apology. No concern. Just confirmation. I kept walking. By the time 3 hours had passed, I was exhausted. My legs ached, my head was spinning, and I could barely feel my fingers. I found shelter under the awning of a closed shop and sat down on the cold concrete, hugging my knees to my chest. I told myself I'd rest for 5 minutes. Just 5. That's when everything changed. Red and blue lights reflected off the wet street, flashing against the windows around me. A police car slowed, then stopped. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they approached. "Are you okay?" one of them asked gently. I tried to answer, but my throat tightened. All that came out was a shaky breath. They wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, asked my name, my age. When I said I was 15 and had nowhere to go, They exchanged the look I didn't understand at the time. One of them stepped aside and spoke into the radio, his voice low but urgent. I didn't know it yet, but while I was sitting there in the rain, my father's world was about to collapse. And the call the police made that night would haunt him for the rest of his life. The police didn't take me back home. That alone should tell you how bad things were. After they put me in the back of the car, one officer stayed with me while the other made several phone calls. I could hear fragments of the conversation through the radio, words like minor, medical history, abandonment, and storm conditions. Every time my father's name came up, the officer's tone changed. We drove to the hospital first. Not because I was hurt, but because I was sick. When the nurse took my vitals, her face tightened. My blood pressure was dangerously low. I was dehydrated, shaking, and barely conscious. As doctors ran tests, one of them asked me a question that still echoes in my head. Who made you leave the house? When I told them, the room went silent. Within an hour, Child Protective Services arrived. Then another police officer. Then a social worker. Papers were signed. Statements were recorded. Everything moved too fast for me to fully understand, but slow enough for the weight of it all to sink in. At some point, a doctor pulled back the curtain and said words my parents had ignored for months. You're not faking this. You have a serious medical condition. And if you'd stayed out there much longer, it could have been fatal. 3 hours. That's how close I was. Meanwhile, at home, my father finally got a call. Not from me, from the police. I didn't hear his side of the conversation, but I didn't need to. I saw the aftermath later in reports, in court transcripts, in the way people described his face when officers showed up at the door. They told him his 15-year-old daughter had been found alone in a storm, that she was hospitalized, that there was medical proof she had been telling the truth all along. They told him they were opening an investigation. Witnesses would later say my father turned pale, that his confidence vanished instantly, that for the first time, he didn't yell, he begged. But it was too late. CPS removed me from the home that night. I never went back. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled. My sister's life fell apart under questioning. Text messages contradicted her story. Doctors confirmed my diagnosis. Teachers testified about my declining health and sudden disappearance. Neighbors spoke about hearing shouting that night. My parents tried to fix it once they realized what was happening. They sent messages. They left voicemails. They cried in meetings. I didn't know. My mother kept saying. But ignorance isn't innocence. Legally, what they did was called child abandonment. Emotionally, it was something worse. I was placed with a foster family who treated me better in 1 week than my own family had in years. They drove me to appointments. They sat beside my hospital bed. They listened. Slowly, I healed. Years passed. I finished school. I moved out on my own. I built a life that didn't include fear or shouting or walking on eggshells. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. As for my parents, they faced consequences. Not the dramatic kind people expect, but the kind that lasts. Court-ordered programs. Supervised contact they never earned back. A permanent mark on records that followed them everywhere. And a truth they couldn't escape. They lost their daughter the night they chose a lie over her life. Sometimes people ask me if my father ever said he was sorry. He did. Years later. By then, I was strong enough to say something I'd practiced 1,000 times in my head. You told me to get out of your house. I listened. Don't ask me to come back into your life now. This story is complete. There was no dramatic reunion. No perfect ending. Just accountability and a future I built without them. And honestly, that was the happiest ending I could have hoped for.